All right, welcome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Simcha. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to read the bio. Rabbi Simcha Zevit, ordained by HaLev, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, in 2011. She lived in the Cleveland area, other than college years, for her whole life until she moved to Philadelphia in 2014. Rabbi Steve and Kol HaLev were important sources of inspiration and support on her rabbinic path. As a rabbinic student, Simcha worked as an educator for Shari Tikva, the synagogue she belonged to, with her family for many years, and was a member of Kol HaLev, where she did her rabbinic internship. Founded Hamakom, a nonprofit that brought people together from different parts of the Jewish community for programs on and Shabbatonim, all focused on learning about and engaging in Jewish spiritual practice. He has served as chaplain for the past 10 years, first at the Cleveland Clinic and later at HaLev University of Pennsylvania. And currently is the rabbi of Narberth, Avara, where she has been the spiritual leader and Hebrew school director since 2015. She has 3 children and 3 grandchildren and is married to Rabbi Sean Zevit. To visit Kol HaLev when they are here as camp counselors for Grandma Zeta. A surprise to you.
My little bio for only for Kol HaLev.
Okay.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay, and I'm going to make you
can you make
co-host. Yes, I'm going to do that right now.
Great. Thank you. So in a way, hello, Phyllis and Linda, Nancy and Margie. Feel like I'm kind of hanging out with some friends. So it's really good to be with everybody, to meet those of you that I haven't met. And just to be here to kind of really thank you so much for asking me to do this, Alan. A lot of digging through memories and experiences, you know, that kind of led me to where I am today, just in thinking about and preparing for talking to everyone tonight. So thanks, it's been fun. I want to start in a Jewish renewal kind of a way, my friends. So I'm going to share, let's see, I hope I get the right thing here. Okay, so I am well aware that singing and chanting online is not great. However, if you feel like unmuting, you're welcome to. I just want to start with these 4 verses. This is, you know, one of the first chants I think I learned as I explored Jewish renewal. And so just to kind of ground us in some of the ideas that we'll talk about later. It is perfect, you are loved, all is clear and I am holy, It is perfect. We are loved. All is clear and we are holy. So I'm going to start with a little teaching. So what we were just looking at was a Shaviti, right? Something to look at as a source of meditation. And that word comes from the verse, I have set the Lord. You guys, many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with it. Shaviti Adonai Lenegdi Amid. I put God, the source, the potential of all, kind of before me. I hold that with me all the time. And this word Shaviti, I have set, is also related to the word hishtavut, which is the word for sameness or equanimity. So the Baal Shem Tov teaches that whatever happens to a person, it should be all the same to him or her, whether praise or insult, and so for all other matters. No matter what happens, one should say, this is whatever, this is part of the plan, this is part of God, comes from God, and if God deems it proper to do so, then I can be with this. Okay, so that's the Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, who actually I was ordained with, talks about that word hishtavut, and she equates it with equanimity, right? A word that we hear often in mindfulness. If you're a practitioner or a student at all of mindfulness meditation, that equanimity is one of the four, what they call the divine abodes, one of the ways of being with all that is. And so she takes this word, equanimity, hishtavut, and she says, how does that apply to the chant that we just did? Because the chant that we just did is connected to the notion of the four worlds in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism. And it says, in the world of Asiya, the world of doing or action or physicality, that things are perfect, not in our view, right? But if we believe that all is connected and all comes from one source, then from however we understand God, that things are unfolding as they should. And then the idea that Yetzirah, the second of these four worlds, the world of the emotions and the heart, that we're loved. You know, so on Shabbat or every day, if you pray every day, or if you carry these words, ahava, rabbah, ahavtanu, right? We're loved by an unending and endless love. And then in the world of Bria or thought, where it says that all is clear, that when we're not clear or we don't understand, we're in a place of mochin de katnut, which is like constricted mind, right? That there's a way that when we can open to it, that there is an understanding available to us that sometimes is blocked. And so, and then in the world of Atzilut or essence, all that exists is goodness or godliness or pure potential. And so, and the holiness of all that is possible, right? So when we say it is perfect, we are loved, all is clear, and I am holy, it's related to these four worlds of Kabbalah. And then we take that and we can bring it to Tara Brach, who is a Buddhist teacher, of internationally known mindfulness meditation teacher, talking about this idea of equanimity, that in some way it's about this quality of presence, that when we walk through the world, we can sort of be, we can develop the capacity to be accepting of whatever it is that's before us. Shaviti Adonai Lenegdi Tamid, that we can sort of be present with, rather than have some kind of a narrow or defensive or controlling ego. There's a way in which we can learn to sort of free ourselves in almost any situation, to be connected to that part of us that's filled with love and compassion and even joy. So I wanted to take us through that just as a way of kind of grounding in a kind of Jewish renewal experience of, taking a text and adding a layer of music or chant to kind of internalize the text, and then layering that with contemporary teachings, and then with Buddha, with a Buddhist teaching, something from another tradition. So all of that, in a way, gives us a sense of a renewal-like way of approaching this, this Hasidic text, Shaviti Adonai L'Nevi Tamid, and carrying it forward to now, and to someone like Tara Brach, a Buddhist teacher. So I'll talk more about those ideas. I feel like a little bit like I'm preaching to the choir here. I see a lot of people who have, kind of been exposed to Jewish renewal for a long time, but that's okay. It's fun too. We can always go back to the ABCs. So I wanted to start a little bit with my story, just to ground myself and all of you, and kind of where I come from as a Jewish renewal rabbi. I started really doing my Jewish learning later in life. I didn't have much of a Jewish education growing up, although I was very much culturally Jewish, socially Jewish, but really didn't know a whole lot. And as a mom with young kids, myself, a group of friends, wanted to know, why are we raising our kids Jewish? What is this about? What does it mean to us? And we started studying with some Aisha Torah rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda Appel and Rabbi Chaim Feld. I don't know if they're still there in Cleveland. Does anybody know them? They're still there. Okay. And so we started asking all of our questions. One of the seminal moments in that 5-year period of study, again with family and close friends, was when we opened up a prayer book. We're like, what is this prayer stuff? What are we supposed to, we don't even know what these words, I can read the Hebrew. I learned how to do that in Hebrew school, but I have no idea what they mean. And when I say them, I'm like, how are we supposed to connect to this? And Rabbi Chaim Feld said to me, well, if you can't relate to the words in the Siddur, just put it down for now and just talk to God as if God were your best friend, right? So forget about the words that were given to you. Just, close your eyes 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day and just talk to God as if you were talking to the closest, most intimate and of course, know it at the time, but that is a form of Jewish my life. That is what put me on a path of this sense that there is such a thing, as hard to explain as it is, of having a connection or a relationship to God. And I use that word less and less these days, but I'm taking you back to the beginning. But so that put me on a path studying with Aisha Torah. I was heading out on a vacation one day, and I pulled a book off the shelf that just spoke to me. The title, it was called With Roots in Heaven by Rabbi Firestone, who's one of the Jewish renewal. Oh, am I frozen? You can't hear me? I see Kevin shaking his head. Everything okay?
You're back again. Yeah.
I'm back again. Okay. I was just saying, somebody go like this if it's okay. I'm not sure where you lost me, but I was just saying sort of this path, Rabbi Tirza Firestone and her book called With Roots in Heaven, which traced her story of growing up Orthodox, kind of leaving the fold because it was a very, she felt some of the inconsistencies of such a strict Jewish practice without much heart or intention or connection to it. And eventually she found her way back into Judaism through Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi and Jewish Renewal. So her book, I read it, I had a talk to her, sent her a letter, went out to visit her, and sort of that's what put me on a path of becoming immersed in Jewish renewal. I was a Clevelander. I had gone to Park Synagogue growing up and didn't have a whole lot more Jewish connection. And I found myself then at a Jewish Renewal retreat in New York City. It was a weekend Shabbaton led by Rabbi David Cooper, who is one of the big Jewish meditation teachers, also connected to the Jewish Renewal movement. So I had a whole experience of a silent Shabbat other than chanting. So completely new experiences. And I feel like, at this point in our lives, our exposure to these things, they don't seem so new. They're coming very infused, and renewed, commonly experienced. And so that put me on a path. I felt at home. It was a place that I was drawn to for the freedom of expression, for the sincerity of the longing for connection, not only to God, but to our inner selves and to each other. I was drawn to the way that teaching and prayer were interwoven rather than just being read from a book. And I know Rabbi Steve leads like this, so it's nothing new to all of you and other experiences you've had. But at the time, it was brand new to me, and a super exciting world that I was just drawn towards. So my heart sort of knew before my head could really grok that I was suddenly on this path of learning and study and becoming a rabbi. I was ordained in 2011. As Alan said in my introduction, HaLev and Rabbi Steve were important to me. Along the way, I met my husband, Rabbi Simcha Zevit. We got married in 2008, and I moved to Philly in 2014. So that's a little bit about my own story of kind of landing in this life and this world of Jewish renewal. I can't really talk much about the history of Jewish renewal without, of course, talking about the life of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. So Reb Zalman was born in 1924. He lived until 2014. He grew up in Vienna, fled Nazi persecution and landed in the United States in 1941. He was ordained by, I think, was it the 8th Lubavitch Rebbe? I'm not sure. But he was a Chabad rabbi, and together with Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, they were sent as shlichim, as emissaries, out into college campuses to educate and try to turn people onto Judaism. And in the 60s, a lot of Jews were heading to ashrams and other places to have a sense of, find spirituality.
Simcha, you're frozen. Sorry. Oh, maybe she'll log back on and it'll be better. Oh, wait. What just happened? Oh, Alan, you're muted. Alan, you're muted. I don't know if you look like you're talking. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I was gonna say maybe it dropped, it logged her off rather than the other way around. Okay, here we go. You're muted.
But I'm not muted anymore. We
Okay.
back? Sorry,
Back.
guys.
Ah,
All right, I'm not sure where exactly I lost you, but I suddenly, and all of you were frozen. It wasn't me that time. And Sean was just saying that at work, this was going on all day. So we'll do the best we can, yeah? we'll have some of that equanimity I was talking about with the teaching there.
Yeah.
So Reb Zalman, as I said, sent out to these college campuses, influenced by the counterculture of exploring religion, connecting to that which is greater than us. No, Kevin's nodding no. Shoot. I have an idea. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe I should time from my phone.
That might
be a
help.
idea.
And also if you just talk rather than and hide your video, because video takes up a lot of bandwidth.
What's the phrase? It's all good. It
is right. It is perfect.
is perfect.
Yeah, no, it'll be okay. Well,
So this is training in action. We're learning.
right,
Yeah.
right. Okay, let's see, maybe without the video.
And unmuted. I don't know if you can hear us, Simcha. You're still on mute.
No. Oh my God.
There we go.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I went to get my phone, guys. I'll try to. Why don't I try to do that, or else I can talk like this.
This
And
is coming through well.
Okay, let's try this then. So where was I? Okay, the 60s, Reb Zalman, influenced by all this other stuff, and so he actually got cut off from his connection to Chabad when he did a presentation called Kabbalah and LSD. So Reb Zalman, just to say, he was an experimenter. And I have an aside of that because Reb Zalman said to he said to his wife, said, why are you cutting me off? I'm just, I'm experiencing the things that you taught me, right? He saw his, the mystical and spiritual experiences that he had been learning about, that his with LSD was one of the ways that I'm not advocating this for anybody, but this is really part of his story. Almost anything that you read about Reb Zalman, you'll see this. And a couple of years ago, John Hopkins was doing a study specifically with clergy on the effects of psilocybin on their spiritual lives. Rabbi Steve, I see you shaking your head. I was rejected from being in it. So I tried, but one of my friends, a Jewish Renewal colleague, was part of the study. And I just wanted to read you a little piece just to exemplify that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? So she wrote, all of these are classic and spiritual, all of the classic any previous personal experiences. But this time I became the teachings and experienced them in an ontological sense so that they were integrated into my very being. It was a kind of timeless experience in which there is no earlier and later in the Torah, right? One of those sayings that we have about Torah, as the sages would say. my consciousness was unlocked and I went from ordinary consciousness, mochin de katnut, and that's the language that was in that teaching I shared with you earlier, kind of like a constricted mind, to transpersonal expanded consciousness called mochin de gadlut. So I just wanted to share that. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And Jewish Renewal, though does not advocate drugs as the way to do it necessarily, although, this is being introduced in, as Alan was saying, as ways of kind of getting in touch with our spirituality. So it's just an interesting connection. So Reb Zalman was about embodiment. He was about experiments. He was such an innovator. The Jewish catalog, that is one of the most, it's an incredibly widely read book. Reb Zalman was behind the community of people that wrote those Jewish catalogs. And that was kind of the start of the Havurah movement, which Reb Zalman is not only the founder of Jewish Renewal, but also as one of the, his ideas led to the Havurah movement as well. In 1978, he formed B'nai Or, which means sons of light, right? It became Pnei Or, faces of light, as he got more gender, he always was gender inclusive, but he realized he needed to change the name. And that started out as like a local congregation here in Philadelphia, but it was also the start of a national organization as more and more people were drawn to him and his teachings and seeking to become rabbis through him and with his ideas. And before there was a Jewish Renewal or a formal ordination program, because you can't really have a movement without teachers and rabbis to teach. So the precursor to all this was what he called a seminary without walls. He and a bunch of rabbis, actually from the conservative movement. So he wasn't doing this as a total renegade, although a lot of what he did was new. He did have colleagues that were from more traditional backgrounds that were still engaged in traditional Jewish life, I should say. And so he started these retreats at a place called Fellowship House Farm, turned eventually into the Kabbalah, which became, open week-long Jewish Renewal experiences in the summer. In the 1990s, that he appointed Rabbi Marcia Prager to be a dean of students to formalize a rabbinic program. As recent as 1993, that what's now called Aleph Alliance for Jewish Renewal became the umbrella under which Reb Zalman and his students and their teachings and the formal training programs now exist. So, and then in the early 2000s, added to the rabbinic program, so Jewish Renewal, Reb Zalman, one of his really innovations, although the reform movement does it now as well, but was to say, there are different types of Jewish clergy. It used to be in Europe, right, that there were people that were reverends and pastors, and we don't use any of that language anymore, but he wanted to train people who wanted to be involved in Jewish life, to perhaps do pastoral care. And so he had the Aleph ordination program develop what's called the rabbinic pastor program. So we ordain rabbinic pastors, cantors, hashba. We have a hashba'ah, a Jewish spiritual direction program. And so there are 4 ways to be ordained through the Jewish Renewal movement. So when you ask, what is Jewish Renewal? Everybody hearing me okay? Okay. I'm going to risk this and then see if it's okay to have you see me. Let's see if it'll work. And I was going to try to show a video, but when you say, okay, so what is Jewish Renewal, right? What's the definition? We used to send emails, students and rabbis say, how do you describe renewal? What's your elevator speech, right? And so for me, my definition of Jewish renewal has to do with the idea that Jewish renewal takes the teachings, the texts, the prayers, the mitzvot, the practices, the outer practices of Jewish life, and seeks to connect them to our inner life, right? So kind of when the inner world and what's given to us on the outside, when they meet, when they kiss, I feel like that's in a way what Jewish renewal is aiming for us to experience. Let me see if I can show this video. If not, we'll forget it. Is it worth a try? It's risky. Okay.
Nothing to lose.
Right. Here it is. Sorry, guys, this was all set. Right, there it is. Okay, you know what? It's all right. So I was going to show you a video that had just different people describing Jewish renewal, why they were drawn to it. But we'll let that go. So Jewish renewal, give you some definitions other than mine. Its core principles. I'm gonna go back to my slides. Okay, so trans-denominational. I was happy to see, Alan, that you called your series 5 Streams of Judaism as opposed to 5 denominations. Still a debate within, people wonder, is Jewish renewal actually a denomination? Is it a movement? What exactly is it? But there were, Reb Zalman really wanted to see it as a trans-denominational movement that would be infused into and influence the denominations of Jewish life that already existed. And that has, in fact, happened. So Jewish renewal is a trans-denominational approach to revitalizing Jewish life, to combine, obviously, the progressive values of egalitarianism to really emphasize what's happening. I'm usually very good at Zoom, guys. I don't know where it went. Let's try that again. Okay. To bring the joy, so the notion of song and dance and music that, again, I know, Rabbi Steve, we see that in Reform congregations, we see that happening. But when Jewish renewal started, that was fairly new, to bring in the idea of deep ecumenism, that, as HaLev says, that, who is wise? The one who learns from every person, that it's a good thing to bring in teachings from other traditions, to bring in poetry, to bring in sources, and see that we can open to other wisdom. Zalman coined the term Davenology. He really did see himself and Jewish renewal as like the research and development arm of spiritually uplifting prayer experiences. So, the whole notion of stopping in the middle of prayer to meditate, that was new. Reb Zalman brought that into Jewish life, and others as well, but it was not common until he started emphasizing we need quiet. the words on the page, he said, were sort of like freeze dried, and we needed to pour our hearts, find a way for our hearts to connect, for them to come alive. And that could happen in the silence, it could happen in movement, it could happen in a way that he taught to pray, where people would talk to each other, read the words of the Shema back and forth to each other. So we wanted people to feel really connected, heart connected in community, connected to their own inner lives and connected to that which is so much larger than us, that we call God. Halacha, I'm going to read one of Marcia Prager's quotes. She says that Jewish renewal is neither halachic nor anti-halachic, but neo-halachic. Just as rabbinic Judaism involved transcending the halacha of temple sacrifice, right? That whole paradigm shift then. So Jewish renewal seeks to go beyond the limitations of traditional rabbinic Judaism to forge a new halacha, which Judaism is conscious of its place in an interconnected world. The new halacha includes expansion of the practice of kashrut, for example, to include ecological and ethical criteria. So the whole idea of eco-kashrut, how are things, how are the animals treated? How is the environment in terms of not only how we prepare food, but how we serve it? That halacha, to go back to like the original, what was the intention, if we could know it, of a particular mitzvah like kashrut, which was to have sensitivity towards the animal, right? And how can we keep the core intention of a mitzvah, but perhaps do it in a different. So we think about Shabbat. Shabbat was a day to be set aside, right? And of course, there's all the types of work that we don't do on Shabbat. But Reb Zalman's way of thinking was that, you can't dig on Shabbat, you can't plant, you can't garden, right? Because that's creating something from a traditional halachic point of view. But the way he taught was that if the essence of Shabbat was about creating a day of rest, creating a day that's separate than all the other days, then if gardening is a thing that makes you feel rest and at peace, and you don't get to do it any of the other days, and the only day you do it is on Shabbat, then it becomes a Shabbat practice. So he took the kind of intentionality behind a mitzvah, and he thought of how can we achieve the intentionality even if we practice it differently. Just another point about Jewish renewal and what it's all about. Jewish renewal is a maximalist about Judaism, that it's a spiritual practice that is meant to apply to our everyday lives. So how do we spend money? How do we treat the earth? How do we have sex? How do we talk about politics? Not just how do we pray and how do we celebrate the holidays and how do we study Torah? So really meant to infuse a framework and oftentimes in the, how do I want to say this? Of course, in a more traditional Orthodox way of thinking, of course, we walk with halacha everywhere we go and everything we do. But most of the other liberal movements, Judaism often became associated with what we did in shul or synagogue if we went, what we did on Shabbat or the holidays. And Jewish renewal is who we are as Jews and as people connected to the larger source of each other all the time, and to kind of understand that everything we do has that lens to it. So I to go back to the original teaching and say one more thing, that Jewish renewal, one of the things that makes it made it different, stand out again, is this connection as a neo-Hasidic movement, bringing back the sense of spirituality that Hasidic life was really about, came about as a reaction against the totally rationalistic and academic way that the Mitnagim thought of Jewish life. And they wanted to bring inner experience and the joy of the heart and a sense of personal connection to God into everything they did. And Jewish renewal came about really for the same kinds of reasons. How do we bring more joy? How do we bring inclusivity? How do we bring more inner experience into the ways that we live and experience our Jewish lives? So I think I will pause there. And I want to give everybody an opportunity to just take a few deep breaths together. That was a lot of words. So just invite everybody, if you are comfortable closing your eyes, let's just sit with the breath for a few moments. And I want to offer, as we do that, one of the very first Reb Zalman things I ever came across. It's called Gate to the Heart, and it's got a lot of his thinking about prayer and the spiritual life. And he offers a meditation there on the letters of God's name, Yod He Vav He. So if you want to just take a moment, again, if you're comfortable, closing your eyes. And beginning to tune into the breath. Breathing in, noticing the in-breath. Breathing out, feeling the flow of breath as the body kind of deflates and air comes out the nostrils. Just following the flow of breath, feeling it move the body. Neshama, the soul, Neshima, the breath. That God breathes the breath of life. So the breath as this flow of life, force of energy from outside of us, through us, and back again. And using the 4 letters, Yud He Vav He, Reb Zalman taught that the Yud is the part of the breath before we take an in-breath. And then as we breathe in, that's like the He of God's name. Holding the breath, letting it fill the body is like the Vav, that whole center column of the body. And as we breathe out again, the He. Kind of letting that which has infused our being now be given back out into the world. And with a few more breaths, just noticing flow. And just inviting you to sit quietly for a minute to see if any questions arise about anything I've shared or about Jewish renewal. And when you're ready to open your eyes again. So any thoughts, questions? I'm wondering, was this the last of the 5? presentations, or is there one more
We
yet to
have
go?
one, we have orthodoxy.
Ah, interesting. Okay,
Um,
great.
So I just had a question, that's not a question, it's more of a just interest. Um, Rabbi Michael Lerner was a big influence for me personally. And we had a small chapter of Tikkun here in Cleveland where we studied his book, Spirit Matters.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
It was a terrific, terrific book. And it did what you said, it integrated values into our everyday life, but in particular into our everyday institutions, not as an individual, but how our values of society being integrated into our schools, into our legal system, things like that. It was really a eye-opening book. Then we brought him here a couple times, and so he was, like I said, quite an influence. Went to a number of the Network of Spiritual Progressives conferences. So I wondered if you had encounters with him at all.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I read his book many years ago. I've been in the same time and learned with him a little bit, but I don't know, as much. You, Alan, probably know more about Michael's teachings than I do, other than to say that, yeah, I think one of the really interesting things, it's not just about Jewish renewal, but again, when you think about sort of the beginning of this movement, the idea that, bringing politics, into the, onto the bima, so to speak, that we can't separate, right, spiritual lives from the lives that we bring into community, into the world, right? And the notion that I forgot to mention, Rabbi Arthur Waskow is another person who, similar to Michael Lerner in ways, where their emphasis, and to bring them forward. And so the whole idea, Reb Zalman, of course, knew all that was important, but he focused more on sort of personal and communal spiritual connection. So that whole idea of tikkun HaLev, of repairing the heart and opening the heart and feeling that broader connection through the heart. And then when Rabbi Arthur Waskow started the Shalom Center, and Michael's tikkun would also be an example of tikkun ha'olam, right? Healing the world. And that both of those are very strong emphases, again, not only in Jewish renewal, I think that's true in Jewish life in general, but Jewish Renewal did a really good job of really bringing that forward with concrete examples, and ways of doing that, tools for doing that. Both Tikkun HaLev and Tikkun Olam. Yeah. What else? I mean, I'd be interested because if you would dialogue a little bit with me, Steve, and others, whoever else, because I think a lot of times people will ask, well, what's the difference between Jewish renewal and Reconstructionism, right? And you can go back to Mordechai Kaplan and his theology, very different than Reb Zalman's theology, right? Of what was, when you go back to the founding of these streams. But in terms of the feel of a Reconstructionist congregation and a renewal community, of course, there's a lot of mixing and merging. And I'm just wondering, again, there's this idea, and I think something that I was reading, talked about the notion that, Jewish renewal is infused, and that was what was meant to do. It wasn't meant to be a separate thing. It was meant to be a set of tools that Jews of any denomination or no denomination could take into how they experienced Jewish life. And so I think it has had a huge influence on all the movements. But I don't know, Steve, if as a Reconstructionist rabbi, how you kind of tease out what those influences are, or, what's your response when people ask you, other than Mordechai Kaplan's and Reb Zalman's theology, what kinds of things you emphasize in that question?
That is a great question, Simcha, and I would be happy to to reflect on it. I did see Margie have her hand up, and I will defer because I had a question that's related to the question you asked me that I wanted to ask you too. But I'll wait until.
I deferred to you, Steve. Please.
Oh man. Okay. All right.
Come back to that.
Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry. Excuse me. So here's the question, just to let you know. I want it. I think I heard you say towards the beginning of your presentation, when you mentioned the word God, that you're using it less and less these days. So I am very curious to hear
Yeah.
if you would unpack that a little bit.
Okay. Well, I actually am in a place right now where, and this is Reb Zalman too. He used the word God field a lot, right? So what he meant by that, I think, right, was just the notion of energy, right? Almost like a scientific understanding that everything is made up of energy. And so I'm just more and that energy holds pure potential. It's the idea of our bodies as vessels that can open to the flow of energy that allows us to be tapped into the highest potential. That's one of the ways that the language that kind of speaks to me at this point. So ideas, and I'm maybe at this, but about quantum physics, right? And the science and the spirit of, and how science and spirituality merge together. So I just have a much more energetic understanding. And so God field fits. And Reb Zalman talked a lot about that as well. He really believed in, for example, I did some training with an organization called Heart Math. And heart math essentially is about it's using meditative techniques, but brief meditative techniques. And it's connected to positive psychology, but it's about how do you use the breath and positive emotions to create literally balance, right, in your nervous system that allows energy to flow through you in a balanced, cohesive way, to not block energy. So those are the kinds of ideas that really speak to me right now. And so if anything, God field speaks to me more than God.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that yeah, I identify with a lot of what you shared in that respect. So
Yeah, I mean, I can add one more little thing to that. So one of the things, a word that I'm really finding really helpful right now is the word whole being, right? So in the work that I did as a chaplain, where I was doing a lot of support for staff and bringing things like mindfulness and resilience and those kinds of things that we all need right now, right? And the word whole being is kind of a mixture of wholeness and well-being, right? How do we be well in all the parts of us? And some of the learning I'm doing about positive psychology, it's all so connected, right? Where they talk about the spiritual, the physical, the intellectual, the relational, and the emotional, right? That there are concrete practices like gratitude. Well, we wake up every day and we say, Moda ani lefanecha, I give, so the whole idea of psychology and spirituality and science and all the places that they merge, that's what I'm really interested in. How do we create a flourishing human being using all of those tools?
that's great.
Yeah.
Aspiration and framing. That's so in terms of the question that you posed about the distinctions, overlaps, interconnections. Sometimes I didn't come up with this construct. I don't know who did originally. Maybe it was Rabbi Sean. I'm not sure. But the idea that within the Reconstructionist movement, there are kind of, two arms or two wings or two subsets that sometimes are referred to as the classical Kaplanian subset and the neo-Hasidic subset.
Yeah.
And I think that, the neo-Hasidic subset of Reconstructionism, I think, has, a fair amount of, shared perspective and source material, with people who might identify more, whatever, as Jewish renewal. I don't know that it makes a big difference. I was gonna say, I don't know if you would, if you think this is accurate or not. So I feel like sometimes I'll say when I'm talking about the distinction is that I feel like in Jewish renewal infused communities and conversations and approaches to Judaism, that Hasidic and Kabbalistic ideas and perspectives are raised up in a really prominent way, and I would say to people, and in the Reconstructionist movement, you can find Hasidic and Kabbalistic perspectives amongst a wide range of other perhaps equally raised up perspectives. So I don't know if you think that's accurate or way off base, but as another and I don't even know that it makes, if there's a lot of value in
it doesn't, right, it doesn't really make a difference. I mean, the other thing I was going to say is that, when again, I held up this little booklet here, where Reb Zalman teaches. He didn't create this idea, right? But he brings forward the idea that when you think about these four worlds, right, when you very simplistically, and you guys being
we're losing you a little bit again.
are all very familiar, right? With, that, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. That when you think about the four worlds and the way that he overlapped it onto the service, for example, onto a prayer service. I think, Rabbi Steve, if I remember right, you have your outlines for your services according to that into those worlds. So that's a very common understanding probably amongst, Kol HaLev congregants. But, I think, and I'm not sure, it doesn't really matter who, but like that would be a Reb Zalman thing, that Jewish renewal kind of brought those ideas forward. And, Jewish renewal is not the only place we, that's part and parcel of how we understand a prayer service. But I think that it's pretty renewally and infused then into other places as it was.
Right. Another really good example, I think, in the same vein, is group Aliot. People often ask me, where did group Aliot come from? And I say that's Reb Zalman, as far as I understand. That he really created this idea, this experience, this kind of expansion of the ritual to do something, much more, that it created a meaningful connection beyond calling up an individual to read the blessing, to create categories of people who all identified with some theme.
Yeah. Great. I see Louise has her hands up, and I think it did too, but now it's not. But Louise.
Yes, I wanted to ask how your experience as a renewal rabbi affected your chaplaincy work.
That's a
Knowing
great.
that you were a chaplain in Cleveland Clinic, and I don't know whether if you've since in Philadelphia have had any experience with that.
Yeah, that is actually, I actually just ended my role, but I've been a chaplain at the Hospital of University of Pennsylvania for the past 7 years. So I think that is this, this is a combination of things I learned through Jewish renewal and through mindfulness maybe, but I might have learned it elsewhere as well. But really the way I looked at my chaplaincy, if I had to put it in a nutshell, is the idea of, shalom, hello, goodbye, and shlemut, right? That those are related. How does shalom, meaning peace, relate to the idea of shlemut, wholeness? Because right, I had a lot of people who were not at peace necessarily, right? I was dealing with lots of people that were going through very difficult times. But the notion that wholeness relates to peace when we can actually be with the whole. So when I'd have, for example, who could only me, or the difficulty or the challenge or the why me of being in the circumstances that they were in, of course, my job is to acknowledge and be with that, of course, whatever feeling was to be, affirmed and to be a companion to them. But it was also to introduce, well, how can you lean in to the whole, right? Because all of that is so true that you feel, but like, is there any little thing we can find that helps you to also tap into the blessing, the light coming through the window, or the taste of the lemon drop that you're eating, or whatever it might be, right? Because nothing's exclusively only one way. And so the whole notion of the totality, right, of our experience, shlemut. And so in my work with chaplaincies, then I'd have people who were, oh, I'm fine, chaplain, everything's fine, Rabbi. Meanwhile, they're in a hospital bed with and they're really sick. So I'm like, well, I don't really, how do I help somebody tap into the pain that they may be feeling? So that whole notion of shlemut, wholeness, was a big driver for my chaplaincy. How do we help people experience, the whole range of how they might be with their circumstances? And I think the other answer to your question is just that, renewal's emphasis on presence and quiet and finding inner wisdom. And to be a chaplain, you really have to be able to sit with someone and not come up with a lot of answers. And so the renewal approach was helpful with that too. I didn't pull out texts. Hi, Margie.
Hi, Simcha.
Oh
So
my
good
gosh.
to see
Yeah,
you.
good to see you.
It's been a while. I'm interested in knowing how Jewish renewal has infused, I don't know if I have the right verbs and all, infused itself or influenced the conservative and the Orthodox movements.
That's a great question. It's hard to say, but I think that, the conservative, again, so much depends on the rabbi of a community and what speaks to them and what they bring forward. But I think the way that renewal just kind of emphasized as a major force of kind of what it was all about, emphasized the notion of kind of her experience and of experimenting with ways to find that. And I think that conservative communities are doing that. Conservative communities are including things like, even music and meditation and creative ways of davening. So I would say that that's true more so for sure more so in the conservative world than in the Orthodox world. So yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that for the Orthodox world, other than that there are some in the video that I was going to show you, woman who grew up in a completely Orthodox environment and came to Renewal because she wanted to feel more, and she wanted to be able to get up and dance, and she wanted to be able to move. Now, I don't know how that's being brought back to the Orthodox world, but people who grew up very knowledgeable and very observant in Jewish life, have come to and are part of the Renewal world, and sometimes without leaving their Orthodox life, them more tools to bring in.
Last question, well, not last for now. I feel like I missed the Kilat Aleph, if I'm saying that correctly. Are there other experiences that are available?
Yes, thank you for asking that. Now, I know you all get your primary spiritual juice and nourishment at HaLev. And it's also true. Aleph actually during the pandemic has really stepped up. We have Minyan that was actually started by Rabbi Razel Raphael. And she started it when her mother died. And then as more people all across the country were, losing, grieving, looking for a community that didn't have a daily prayer service. So every night at 9 o'clock, open to whoever wants to show up, is a minyan that started as a place for people to come and say Kaddish, but is now turned into just a Jewish Renewal minyan. And there's also one every Wednesday, totally open. It's at a strange time at 11:30 our time. And then there's different programs on our calendar. There's an upcoming honoring of Reb Zalman's legacy that's open to everyone. There's a cabaret coming up. There's several things that are just open to whoever wants to come, and some classes as well.
Are there any conferences or workshops like multi-day?
Yeah, so we have pretty much every other summer for, I think this was what Kabbalah will we be on? Do you know? Like the okay. So every other summer, there's a gathering called the Kabbalah, which Barbara and Barry have been to many times. I know other people have been to a Jewish Renewal Kabbalah. And it's basically it's a full week and tons of classes, great davening, it's a great experience. The next one actually is going to be close to Philadelphia. So if anybody's, and it's going to be next summer, it's going to be in Westchester. So that's about a 30-minute drive from here. Anything else, anybody?
I think Kevin and Sue, it looks like they have a question.
We
Go for
had experienced a Shabbat at a Renewal congregation some years ago in Vancouver. And the dominant thing that I remember about it is that they lifted the Torah and showed it to everybody before they laned from it. And I thought, Well, that makes a lot of sense. Show it to us and then read from it.
Uh-huh.
And
Interesting.
so
Yeah.
my question is, what other practices that you're familiar with in renewal services would be different and interesting compared to, let's say, our normal Kol HaLev services?
So that actually, Kevin, that is interesting. I don't know that I've seen that done as sort of a typical renewal kind of a thing. That may have just been unique to, that was probably either Rabbi Laura Duhan Kaplan or Rabbi Hannah Dresner. Was it Laura? She's fantastic. She's great. So again, if it weren't Kol HaLev, I could say a lot more, but the whole notion of, chant, meditation, dance. I don't, I typically didn't do this a lot, but one of the things that's not uncommon in a renewal service is to actually, what I was talking about, sort of like the paired davening, where people would actually turn to each other, for example, and saying the Shema is the one that's coming to mind for me, of literally reading the words back and forth, and sort of, being guided or invited to literally look into the eyes of the other as created in the image of God. So that whole notion of how do we create when there's an openness to it and without pressure or expectation that it works for everybody, but creating those opportunities where there's a deeper connection shared between people, in one-on-one or in small groups. So that I haven't seen a lot of in other places than renewal communities. But like I said, a lot of the other things, I think, the whole notion of what it meant, and you guys do this all the time at Kol HaLev, but to, really offer a particular prayer with a very, intentional kavanah. Like I'm thinking of, and to really help people feel like the words are, they're not just words on a page, but they're your words, your experience. And I'm thinking of a service where we literally were instructed to stand. This was for the Amidah, right? And the first Amidah is about your ancestors, right? Connecting to Abraham, being a part of this chain of tradition. So we all stood and turned and had our hands on the shoulder of the person in front of us, so that we all sort of formed this chain. And, we were guided to imagine that everyone, behind us were our ancestors, that there was something being passed down the line to us, and imagine that everyone in front of us were those that came after us. And so literally to embody that sense of being part of a chain of tradition, and then, grounded in that, to pray the words of the Amidah. So that's one example of a very particularly focused practice that includes, a physical component and an emotional or, inner heart component to help the words be more connected to, again, that shlemut, that wholeness of who we are when we say them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Steve does it all. A lot, yeah. Anything else?
Just one
Yeah.
quick thing. The couple services I went to that Michael Lerner led, there was just a tremendous amount of dancing. I mean, we didn't move, we didn't stand still the whole time. And I just wondered if that's part of a more traditional renewal.
Traditional renewal, if there is such a thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, not the whole service doesn't sound right, but I mean, amazing musicians, people that really value music, as part of their prayer experience are drawn to renewal for sure, because it's just such a part of davening. So yeah, it's not uncommon to have, great music and plenty of dancing, but also then stillness, right? Combined with stillness or combined with traditional davening, like having all these different modalities as part of it, and recognizing that some people can connect in one way, but not in another. So the way that we can kind of mix all those modalities so that there's kind of something for everybody to have a chance to really connect to what's going on in the service. Another thing that stood out to me, I'm not going to do it, but to kind of, there's no better or worse, but back to the question of sort of renewal and Reconstructionism, I was tempted to show, and with the way the technology is working, it's definitely not worth it. But I was really, really struck when I first went to a Reconstructionist, graduation, right? Because you don't call it an ordination, right? Right. Yeah. So, everybody's seated, pretty, academic in a lot of ways, personal in the sense that I remember that like the dean or someone spoke to each student, and each student maybe gets a couple, each new rabbi maybe gets a couple minutes to speak. But it was pretty quiet and serious and, like a college graduation. And a Jewish renewal or nation is, there's music playing and people kind of float down the aisle, kind of dance down the aisle to the front. And we literally do a smicha, like a hands-on, a transmission of the legacy. And there's a formula that said that all the rabbis are behind the people getting smicha, that they say out loud, and each rabbi gets quite a long time to give a devar or a teaching or a cantor to sing, so that kind of very personal, it's very personal and very lively. And it just struck me that there's a very big difference in the tone of the two ceremonies. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's
Well, it
helpful.
looks like we maybe, yeah.
I'm sorry. Is there, Margie, were you raising your hand again? No, okay. Okay. All right. Well,
I did, if I can interject, Simcha, I did send you a note looking
Ah,
for California. I winter out there now and just looking at possible resources to find a community to be there in the winter.
got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Let me think about that. If you said Berkeley or some other places, I would say, yeah, but I'm not sure about San Diego.
well, Simcha,
Well, what a
it
pleasure to be with everybody. Thank you
was
so
so
much.
great to have you here this evening and just to be in your presence. It's been way too long. And to have you, participate in this series, and help to unpack and deepen everybody's understanding of where Jewish renewal fits into, the complex way, the more complex way that Jewish renewal fits into the palette of American Jewish experience.
Yeah, well, great to come back and be with everybody. Sean probably wants to say hello. He just arrived on the scene.
Woohoo! Hello, Reb Sean. All right. All right. Great to see you. Very cool. It's it feels like getting to see you guys together on Zoom. It's almost like, you know, it's almost like having you here. Not quite as good, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Well, I want to, as always, I want to thank Alan for organizing this series. And as Alan said, we do have one more week. Next Wednesday evening is our final session for this series on modern Orthodoxy. And same time, same station. I apologize. I feel terrible. I'm absolutely blanking on our presenter. And I know I'm just blanking on her name. Alan?
Cooper.
Simcha.
Alana Cooper. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
Alana Cooper. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Alana Cooper will be presenting. So, thanks to everybody for being here, and again, thanks to Rabbi Simcha for a really interesting and engaging presentation. And wishing everyone a good and healthy rest of the week, and hope to see you all soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.
Good night, everybody.